Hi everyone, and welcome to those of you just joining. It's really incredible that we've got over 1,300 people on the call now. That's way more than we ever expected. We're going to get going really shortly. We're just waiting to try and sort out a couple of tech problems. So just hang tight, we'll be getting going soon. Cool. Hi everyone. We're going to be getting going really shortly. Still trying to sort out a couple of tech problems. But yeah, it's absolutely amazing that we've now almost got 2,000 people on this call. That's so many more than we ever expected. We're really glad that you're here for this really important call. Yeah, as I said, we're going to get going in just a couple of minutes. So hang tight.
Hello? Oh, blimey.
Oh, hi John. Just to say, we're going to be getting going shortly.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. We're
going to thank God.
We're going to be getting going in just a sec. We're just trying to sort a bit of a tech problem, so just hang tight.
Okay.
All right, I've muted. All right, guys. So we've been trying to work out how to make the chat function work, but and we're going to keep trying throughout the call. But we think it's that there's so many people on the call that it's for some reason it's not working, which is a real shame. But we do know you're all there, and we're really excited that there's so many of you on the call. Yeah, so let's make a start. So welcome again, everyone, to tonight's special post-election call. Thank you so much for joining. My name's Claire, and I work at Momentum's comms team. And just a heads up, I'm definitely going to cry at some point in this call. We're not exactly sure when. Just be nice to me when that happens. And I'm joined by the amazing Santi, who runs our campaigns team here at Momentum.
I'm a 50-50 for crying.
The first important thing to say is a really heartfelt thank you to every single one of you for the role that you played in this election campaign. Thursday night was incredibly painful and disappointing for us all, and there's no getting away from that. But our movement is about so much more than just one election, and we have a shared goal of transforming society, and Thursday's result does nothing to change that. We fought this election together, and now we must reflect and plan for the future together too, and that's exactly why we're hosting this call tonight. I just want to say that I really am incredibly moved by how many people we have on the call tonight. We were a bit worried that people would feel demoralised right now, but the fact that we have over 2,400 people on this call, which is even more than we had on the call that we had for our launch, that's really quite stunning. And I really think it shows that, you know, our movement isn't going anywhere. And this defeat that we faced on Thursday is not going to stop our struggle for a just and equal society. And, you know, although the defeat was really devastating, you know, we're here together and we absolutely aren't giving up. So yeah, just thank you so much all for joining. This is, yeah, it's really, really incredible. I'm now going to hand over to Santi, who's going to be giving us a brief overview of what we're going to be talking about tonight.
Hi, everyone. So I'm just going to run through what the plan for tonight's call is. So first, we're going to have some time to reflect honestly on the election result and talk about how we got here and what the key obstacles were for our movement. Then we're going to be joined by John McDonnell, as you can see already. He's going to share some of his thoughts on what happened, and also there'll be a chance for you to ask questions. So there isn't a chat for everyone else to see, but we can see your questions, so keep posting them if you've got any questions for John McDonnell. Then, I think we might have fixed the chat, we'll see. Then we'll review and celebrate some of the key achievements we've had from the campaign, including hearing directly from some activists up and down the country who've been involved over the last 6 weeks, including from Sarkar. And then finally, and most importantly, we'll talk about the future, what next, and discuss how we go forward from here as a movement. So to get started, we're going to have a bit of reflection on the result from John McDonnell. He's been, doesn't really need an introduction from me, but he's been the centre of Labour strategy over the last 4 years, and he's going to have a great perspective on kind of what we've achieved in the last 4 years and what happened over the last 6 weeks. Then we're going to do a quick Q&A after he speaks. So if you've got any questions, please put them in the chat box and we'll pick them out as you ask. So John, I think we can all hear you now. So just get started when you're ready.
Okay, can you hear me all right?
Yeah, John.
We can hear you.
Okay, all right, okay. I'm trying not to move this camera about because I'm sitting in the only tiny spot left in my study that isn't covered in books and paperwork and leaflets and posters, etc. And even that you can see is pretty stuffy too. Anyway, look, let me start with the thanks as well. I just want to thank everyone for the effort, the real hard work and commitment that everybody has shown in this campaign and for quite a while over the last few years. If it wasn't for Momentum, we wouldn't be in, well, I think the social movement that we now are. I think we need to recognize the achievement of, we've gone from what was a political party with declining numbers of members and actually limited amounts of campaigning as well. Now, I'm not denigrating anyone for that. I'm just saying that was the political situation we were in only 4 years ago before Jeremy stood for leadership of the Labour Party. And since then, we've become a mass movement. We're a real social movement now, and we're learning the lessons of what that means. It's, you know, with nearly 500,000 members, largest political party in Western Europe, and I think levels of creativity in our party and our movement that we've not seen for a long period of time. That's the first thing. The second thing is, attached to that movement and part of that movement is a new architecture of think tanks. So in the 1970s and 80s, there were a large range of left think tanks that were providing the fuel for the development of ideas and creativity. A lot of those were wiped out in the late 80s and into the 90s and even part of the 2000s. Now what we have, as a result of people becoming engaged in political activity through Momentum and others as well, is that we have a real architecture now of think tanks who have become sort of the part of the engine room of developing of ideas, researching policies, and really, I think, developing an expertise that we lost over the years. And it's just so creative. We're sort of hegemonizing, we're dominating the political debate. All our ideas that we've been developing over the last few years, thanks to all of you, actually do set the agenda, and it has won. That's what Jeremy said, we've won the argument. So the issue is, having built that movement, having got all these great ideas and all these policies, why didn't we win the election? And we need a real discussion. And I think one of the things that could come from tonight, and Momentum could help lead on bringing people together on all this, is to have a really detailed discussion of what happened. And it isn't just about what happened nationally or globally. Of course, those trends are important, but also it'd be interesting to know what happened in individual communities and even down to individual conversations. What were the issues that came up? What was it that prevented us having a majorities and losing seats and not gaining them, although we gained some, but it was a matter of holding on as much as possible. My own view is this, is that I'm trying to work out what was the difference between 2017 and 2019, because although we didn't win in 2017, we came pretty close. And I always say, if we'd have had another week in the 2017 election campaign, we would most probably be in government now. Part of the difference, and we have to be straight with ourselves on all of this, is that actually Brexit became the issue. We didn't want it to be the sole issue, but it did become the dominant issue of the campaign, and the Tories made it that. But it was, to be honest, practically and pragmatically, it was the key issue that people wanted to address. And there was an element of almost Brexit fatigue. The debate around Brexit, having the referendum decision made, and then the debate and discussion going on about Brexit in Parliament and the committee for so long, it was interesting. Even many of those people who supported Remain just wanted to get the thing over and done and out the way. And so that slogan that the Tories had, "Get it done," did resonate for a lot of people, because they were just Brexit fatigued out. And even though I think in many of the issues we won the argument around Brexit and the impact it would have on our economy and our cultural life, our lifestyles, etc., a lot of people just thought, look, I want to get this over and done with. And we were caught on the horns of a dilemma, which is the bulk of our members, and the last figure on the polls was about 70% of our members campaigned for Remain and wanted to remain within the EU. But there was large numbers of us, including me in my own constituency, which I was surprised at when the referendum result came out, were representing Leave constituencies. So there was always this dilemma about what do we do about that? What's the strategy? We tried to develop a policy over time coming from the Labour Party conference, whereby we went through a various sequence of events and then eventually wound up with the proposal that we would go back to the people, negotiate a credible deal, go back to the people and let the people decide. But by that time, I think Brexit's fatigue had set in. And we were stuck, and it was almost an impossible position. If you go for Remain, as many of us wanted to, it would have alienated all the Leave voters, or most of the Leave voters, so we would have been smashed in our position. If you then went to solely Leave, you'd alienate the Remain voters, which were quite a sizable group of Labour voters, and so we would have lost those seats. So we were placed in virtually an impossible position, and so we took a strategic decision, which I obviously didn't work. We thought, well, the only way to bring the people back together again is to go back to the people in another referendum, but with both options available. And the reality is that didn't wash. It didn't wash. People want a decision one way or the other. And unfortunately, the bulk of them in many of our Labour constituencies up north and in the Midlands wanted a straightforward Brexit decision, and that was it. So I think that objectively, it was almost as though we were on a hide into nothing. It was almost impossible to manage it. Constitutional politics are like this. It's the same as in Scotland, and constitutional politics it's like having a mist over the reality of what the real world is like in terms of how people live it. And what we tried to do in the campaign, and have done for the last couple of years, is to try and cut through that by saying, what are the real issues that people are facing other than Brexit? And it was public services, end of austerity, the way people were short of income was an issue, and low pay, insecure work, impact upon the NHS, education, all those public services as a result of austerity. And we tried that, and that was a lot of our messaging was around, throughout the campaign, was around austerity, ending it, and the cuts in those public services. And the threat to the public services, particularly the NHS, with regard to the sellout to Trump. But in the end, it didn't cut through. The dominant issue was still Brexit. And no matter how hard we tried, we just couldn't cut through that fog and mist of Brexit to, I think, people's living standards and austerity in public services. The other issue, and we have to be honest about this as well, is that we were getting sort of criticisms of Jeremy on the doorstep. And it was, in my constituency, it wasn't that much. In other constituencies where I went, it was an issue. And it was almost a regurgitation of what was going on within the media itself, all the same old allegations, most of which were completely untrue or refuted or smears. And that political assassination, character assassination that went on of Jeremy week in, week out, almost on a daily basis in certain medias, that was then picked up by the broadcast media, did resonate and came back to us on the doorstep. And again, I don't think we were able to cut through on that. The best way of cutting through, because we don't, the right wing control the press largely, there's not many papers that support us. The best way was always to be cutting through that, as we did in 2017, was through broadcast media. But this time round, I have to say, and I don't think this is an excuse, I think it's pretty well evidenced that in broadcast media, it was pretty tough as well, because the press stories actually infiltrated and permeated the broadcast media as well. And the other issue was from 2017. 2017, we dominated the social media largely. We were more creative than the Tories, we were more effective, but it was largely because our social media was organic and not much paid for. This time round, from 2017 onwards, the Tories put a lot more money into recruiting. Some of you remember the story of 12 months ago or longer, where they recruited 50 people basically to troll Twitter and elsewhere. And that went on apace. And on this time round, in terms of the social media, they certainly outspent us in the last week or so, but also I think they had a whole range of different individuals and organizations mounting attacks on us in a way that maybe in 2017 they weren't sufficiently organized. They brought in the Australian agency that ran the election campaign there, and that they concentrated on, in Australia, they concentrated on one simple message, which was about tax rises. And although the Labour Party there did have a reasonable manifesto, range of policies, they couldn't cut through. And that one simple message on taxation was the one that effectively the Tories in Australia ran on. Here, they ran on a straightforward, get it done Brexit message. And unfortunately, I don't think, and this is self-criticism here, I don't think our narrative was good enough or simple enough. I don't think we really were effective at getting a simplified narrative across. And for future campaigns, it's a lesson to be learnt. In Jeremy's leadership elections, both of them, we had a straightforward, simple narrative. And in 2017, it was end austerity, basically, for the many, not the few. End austerity for the many, not the few. On this one, we were fighting on so many fronts. I don't think there was a clear enough narrative either about Brexit or about the transformation of the society that we wanted. So there's some of my lessons from it all. It is devastating. I can't, we're all deeply upset. And I know a lot of tears have been cried over the last couple of days as a result of all this. And I feel a absolute personal responsibility. And I've apologized to everyone, because really the buck stops with me when it comes to what happened and where it went wrong. And I'll bear that responsibility. You can't walk away from that. And I've apologized both to those MPs who've lost their seats, but also to all our campaigners, yourselves, for not being able to deliver. And also the key thing for all of us, though, is it's those people who are so desperate for a Labour government. In my constituency now, I'll be dealing with the worst housing crisis we've seen since the Second World War, and poverty on a scale I've not seen for the 40 years I've lived here. It's pretty grim, and I can't see it getting better under Boris Johnson. Where do we go from here? I think we need, first of all, we do need a proper discussion. And I think a real discussion, community by community, coming together nationally as well, sharing those ideas, looking at what worked, what didn't. looking at the creative ideas that people have got about how we communicate. How do we bypass the media dominance that our opponents have, that capital has? How do we overcome that? Now that initially we thought social media and broadcast media, as well as word of mouth, the meetings, etc., would do it, and that worked in 2017, but they've caught up us on that. They control much more the broadcast media. Their social media, they're dominating. And the meetings that we do are effective, but it's still relatively small amounts of communication with small numbers, even though some meetings have been up to 1,000, things like that, they're still relatively small numbers. So the discussion now is how do we form a different type of communication strategy, and I'd welcome people's ideas on that. The second thing is I think the policy program, actually, our analysis of society is right. I think our policy program was right, but actually there wasn't an overall narrative about how we transform society. So I think that's what we need to talk about. How do we communicate that narrative? How do we develop a narrative and communicate it overall? Finally, let me just say this. Jeremy and I are standing down. We've got a leadership election. The National Executive Committee, I think, is going to be meeting next week. They'll decide a timetable for that leadership election. It will be in the new year, usually about 8 to 10 weeks. And there'll be a whole range of candidates that will be putting their names forward. I think what we've got to do in that leadership election is make sure there is no rancor whatsoever. Make sure it is held in a very friendly, constructive, and as we say, comradely spirit, and that we use that election, the leadership debate, as part of the discussion about not just how we lost the last election, but what were the basis upon which we've developed the party now, but also what is the future? What are the future ideas, and what are the future priorities for us? And then we can judge whoever is the leader as part of that, should be the leader as part of that debate. Two things on that, really. I think what never got debated in the general election campaign properly, and it wasn't for want of trying, was climate change. And that's my biggest fear now, that we're going to have a Tory government, possibly for 4, maybe 5 years, which is, on the fossil fuel industry, has no understanding or acknowledgement of the climate emergency we're in. And this next 5 years is key to us. So I think we've got to talk about the nature of our campaigning during that period, particularly around the issue of climate change was a priority. And then finally, I think also we need to think about the nature of our organisation, how we come together, how do we discuss things, how do we communicate, how can we be much more effective in both connecting ourselves as activists, but also in connecting to our communities that we seek to represent. I think part of that will be about running individual campaigns around individual issues, of course, but then connecting them to our wider analysis of society. Anyway, I've spoken enough now. Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, John. I mean, I think the first thing I want to say is just reflecting on what the hundreds of people are saying in the chat, which is that there's no need for you to apologize. And if anything, we should be thanking you and Jeremy for what you've achieved, not just in the last 4 years, but the last 30 years.
Yeah. 100%.
And I think it's worth keeping that in mind when we becoming that perspective that this fight we're having, it's not just about from 2015, it's from 1945. It's been going on for such a long time. And you and Jeremy played such a key part in that. So while we've still got a bit of time, what I might do is I'll take 1 or 2 questions. So firstly, I'm going to start with Eric Lewis, who's got a question that's also very important for momentum. And that's, how do we build on the social movement idea and raise up all the great activism that Labour members do beyond the Labour movement and the Labour Party?
I think now it's about creative campaigning. I really do. I think it's about making sure we've got to do 2 things, and one is winning the battle of ideas, and the second is winning the battle of organisation. I think we are winning the battle of ideas. Otherwise Boris Johnson wouldn't be lying about ending austerity and investing in the NHS and other things. It's all a con, but he wasn't. The only reason he's on that agenda is because we've forced him onto it, because we've won the battle of the ideas about ending austerity and where we go from here. So I think it is still this creative work of discussing the society we live in, the challenges that we face, both nationally and globally, but also at the very local level. That's the first thing. I think we do need to look at how we do that. But also, Momentum and the World Transformed and others is about political education too, because the Labour Party almost gave up on political education for a long period of time. And I think what we've got to do is use Momentum and the World Transformed and other organisations to make sure we're developing people's ideas and their understanding of the history of our movement and the society that we face. That's the one. I'd welcome how we go about that, using social media, using the internet, other tools as well as in this coming period. The second thing as well, in terms of individual issues, as we come, inevitably with this Tory government, there's going to be a whole range of issues now that people will build up concerns about and anger, and they'll want to see change, and this government will resist that change. So we've got to think about what campaigns we prioritise. As I say, climate change is going to be I think the biggest challenge we face, but there's also the issues around, as we saw, what the Momentum workers were doing up in Barnet around the housing crisis that's there and the way tenants have been treated by Barnet Tory Council. Those grassroots campaigns, I think we've really got to get stuck into and build up those individual campaigns, but link them as much as possible to an overall analysis of society. I spoke at the disability group, the disabled people's group the other night, which was really packed and really enthusiastic. It was disabled people for a Labour victory. But again, with DPAC, Disabled People Against the Cuts, it's almost using that model where we're campaigning on an individual issue, because that's what's hurting and hitting people at the moment. We've got to try and defend them, support them, campaign alongside them, but then enable that to be broadened into a much greater understanding of why this issue is happening, why this is happening to people, why it's about the nature of the society we live in. So I think we've got to be at the forefront of every local community campaign now. We've got to be visible as well as Labour Party members, and it's the Labour Party that's heavily involved, working alongside people.
Thank you, John. I think the second question, which kind of touches partly on your answers, comes from Dahlia. And she asks, how can we win key time-constrained policy aims, such as climate change, when we are nowhere near electoral power?
I think it's because we can force onto the agenda issues and then use people power as much as possible to demonstrating and engaging in this wider discussion. So using every possible media form that we can to get the issue discussed, so that everywhere, for example, everywhere, take the newly elected Conservative MPs in those seats that they've just won off us, making sure those individual Tory MPs now, everywhere they go in their constituency, there's someone raising the issue of climate change with them, or there's local campaigning to put pressure on them. And all of that then is about mobilizing people to push this government into some form of action. Now, I don't think this government will act on this, but it's about making sure then when that next election comes, they are exposed for what they've done. I think that we might be able to make sure that even the Johnson government has to acknowledge the scale of the emergency that we face. And in other countries now, there are developing movements which are forcing their governments to act. And it might well be that by mobilizing this country and internationally, we're able to then force even the Johnson government to go along with some of the international agreements and developments that have taken place. The COP will be coming to this country as well, and that gives us a really important, I suppose, a really important focus on the campaign that we do around climate change. And in some ways as well, we've got to make sure that in using that, we develop from that very concrete ideas so that when we go into government, we hit the deck running on those ideas.
John, thank you so much. Yeah, there's an awful lot of love for you that's coming through on the chat right now. So yeah, just wanted to let you know that you're incredibly loved by our movement, and we're all incredibly inspired by you. And yeah, we're really, really grateful for you coming on the call as well. So thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot. Cheers.
Round of applause for John.
You've moved me now to tears. Thank you very, very much. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, awful lot of emotion in the office too right now. So I know it feels like there's an incredibly big uphill struggle ahead of us right now, and that can seem extremely daunting, especially so soon after the election. But it's also really crucial to remind ourselves of the achievements of this campaign, because these achievements are going to serve as really strong foundations for our organising going forward. We're absolutely not going back to square one. That's not what this is. We're building on and learning from our successes. So I'm now going to hand over to the amazing Ash Sarkar, who's going to be talking about what we've achieved this election and why this is such an important basis to be moving forward from.
There's apparently a chair shortage in the Momentum office. I've had to boot the lovely Santi out just temporarily. It's amazing to see so many people on this call. John, thank you for joining us, and I want to reiterate what everyone else has said, is thank you for everything you've done for this movement, not just in the last 4 years, but for decades now. You've truly been a leading light. You've shaped all of our politics, and we wouldn't be here, we wouldn't be where we are without you. And I think it really is important to talk about our successes, because together we built a movement of hope, of solidarity, of determination, and those were words which just weren't being used before the Corbyn project burst into being in 2015. I didn't realise there was a place for those words in politics. And we know now that there are tens of thousands of us who are willing to give up days, weeks, months of our lives just so we can struggle for a better society. And I think one of the big learning experiences from this election is that we now know it's not sufficient for our work to be confined to a 6-week election campaign. The forces against us are too strong for that to win on its own. So our work, our passion, our commitment has to be channeled into building something durable and long-term organizations of oppressed people, marginalized people, working class people. Essentially, the many need to be corralled to have institutional power so we can fight the landlords, the bosses, and the Tories. And even though we have suffered a defeat, we have the relationships and we have the infrastructure to grow this kind of movement. Because look at what we've achieved in the last 6 weeks, and indeed the last 4 years. We've completely changed the conversation on austerity. You know, I remember a few years ago where the response to the financial crisis was to say Labour would cut deeper than Thatcher, that we would be harsher on welfare than the Tories. We've completely demolished that as a ruling ideology. Some of the things that were part of popular culture, and I'm thinking here of like the demonization of welfare recipients, benefit street, all of that sort of pop cultural apparatus which served to prop up the war on the poor, which was waged through cuts, wouldn't be socially acceptable anymore. And that's because of our social movement. So if we can do that in 4 years, if we can do that in 6 weeks of an election campaign, just imagine what we can do in the next 5 years, the next 10 years. And the thing which struck me the most about this campaign were the stories of warmth, of connection, of comradeship. And just because so many of us have been willing to throw so much of our energy into building a better world is itself a repudiation of a capitalist ideology, a neoliberal ideology, an individualist ideology, which is forced down our throats at every turn, which says that all of us should just be minding our own business, getting on with what we do, and not batting an eyelid when conditions are made worse across the board for so many people in this society. And that's not something to be embarrassed by. Those values, those beliefs, the belief in mutual support, in love for one another, in justice, in liberation, in equality, these are the values of socialism, and they've existed before us, and they will continue far, far beyond one election defeat. Because I truly, truly believe that no collective effort is ever in vain. And I tell this story a lot, and that's because it doesn't stop being true. But when I was 18, we occupied our university when tuition fees trebled, and it was kind of like a crash course in politicization and radical organizing. And I will never forget that before this horrible night in December, there was a previous horrible night in December when we lost the vote in the Commons, so many of us got kettled and beaten in Parliament Square. We were cold, we were totally without hope, and nobody, Labour backbencher, came to visit us at the UCL occupation, and it was John McDonnell. And when you came to speak to us, John, I could never have imagined at that point that the anti-austerity movement that I was a part of, which had just been steamrolled by the establishment in Westminster, would find a home in the Labour Party, and that my mates who were sleeping on the floor at that occupation would be part of transforming the national conversation with you and with Jeremy leading the opposition party. And the point I want to make off of that is that even in the very depths of defeat, the networks and the bonds that we form can become the backbone of something much stronger. It just takes time, it takes solidarity, it takes having faith in our values and the humility to learn from our losses. So I think I've been rabbiting on for long enough. I squeezed a couple of tears out of Claire, which was my only goal. I think we should hear from a few of the other people who've been campaigning over the last 6 months about what this campaign has meant to them. And if you've got a personal story that you want to share too, because we're all oversharers in the movement, that's the real redistribution there. It's actually a personal information, not wealth. If you've got a personal story that you want to share, just type it out, put it in the chat box, because we've had some amazing stories from people across the country during this campaign. Stories of people microwaving their canvassing sheets on polling day because they got so drenched in the rain. Stories of random members of the public offering to let soaked canvases in to dry off and have a cup of tea. The campaign was made up of tens of thousands of these stories, and that's exactly what we want to hear about. So I'm going to bring the lovely Santi back.
Thank you, Ash. That was really great to hear from you. So yeah, now we're at the point of the call where we want to hear from a few other organisers who've been involved in this campaign across the country, hear some of their personal stories of solidarity, of comradeship during the past 6 weeks. So first up, I hope we have the wonderful Kulsoom, who's based in Bristol. Kulsoom, are you there? Uh-oh, we can't quite hear you yet. We're just trying to unmute you. Oh,
yep.
There we go. Hey.
Okay, fantastic. Hi, everyone. It's so inspiring to see, almost 3,000 people on this call. Thank you to Momentum for organizing it. Thank you to John and Jeremy for inspiring it. I think one of the greatest successes that we've seen, I don't even need to say this, most people have seen the photos across social media, across everywhere else, hundreds and hundreds of people flocking to marginals. When there was people needed to help door knocking, Momentum answered the call, our activists answered the call, Bristol Momentum, for example, went to almost 15 different marginals in the Southwest, but also in the Midlands. And one of the places we went was Stroud, and when we were there by 3:30, we had knocked every single door twice. So this is the kind of passion and just the amazing readiness we had to win this. And despite the result, we do have all these trained up activists, new people in the movement that we're just going to channel that energy and continue to move forward. I will share one story that came from one of our comrades in Bristol, Karis. She knocked on a door and it was an older gentleman who was in Gloucester, and he said that his 15-year-old daughter was really inspired by the Labour Party and our manifesto, and she would talk to him at every opportunity about the policies. He was so proud of her. He said she's taught him so much. No matter how old you get, you never stop learning. And he said that he was going to the ballot box on Thursday to vote for Labour for the both of them. So these are the types of things we're seeing, and we're going to continue to see. The young are teaching the old, and we have an entire new generation coming on board that are going to be there to support us and re-energize the movement. So it's not just us. It doesn't end with us. We just continue the fight, and we will continue the fight. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kulsoom. I really, really appreciate it. And thanks for sharing your story. We're now going to be joined by John Taylor up in Redcar, who's going to be sharing some of his stories.
Ooh, John, can you hear us?
I can hear you, yeah.
Yay! How's it going, John?
Am I doing the business? Am I on now?
You're
Okay,
live.
thanks, Nancy. I mean, firstly, I want to really do some congratulations, with regards to Claire and Santi and the Momentum team, who have been absolutely tremendous throughout this general election campaign. In over 40 years, it's the best campaign I think I've ever been involved in. And as others have already, I concur to what the others have said about John and Jeremy. There is no apology required. All I wish to do is thank them for all they've done and for the transformative movement that we now have. So I'd just like to look back on the election, and I think the hardest part of this campaign was not going out in all weathers, all the wind, the rain and all that stuff, not the smears and the lies and stuff, but the heartbreaking stories that I heard on the doorstep in Hartlepool and Middlesbrough South and these areas on Teesside, and especially the elderly and the vulnerable who were, for instance, this lady I spoke to who said she had 24 hours to find a care home for her husband that was suffering from dementia due to the local council cuts. And also the elderly gentleman whose wife had waited 7 hours for an ambulance in cold, freezing conditions and in real pain. These are the people we cannot abandon, and therefore we need to press on with the movement. Thanks for letting me speak.
Thank you so much, John. Really
Thanks, John.
Now
We finally just got your video on, so we didn't see that. We can see you now.
All right, sorry about that. Yeah.
No.
Okay, are you all right? Yeah, I can see
thank
it
you
now.
so much.
It's just the screen in front. I couldn't wonder if I was on or I wasn't. But I appreciate obviously coming on and expressing those sorts of stuff.
And we appreciate you taking the time. Really do. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sandy. Thanks, Claire.
No worries. We're now. See you later. We're going to be joined by Lisa Rossetti up in Chester, who's been a long-time activist in the Labour Party and in Momentum.
Lisa, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. I can see you as well. Yeah. So thanks for this opportunity. And obviously, I just want to say a huge thank you to John and Jeremy, who you basically woke up my socialist heart. So ever since that day I heard Jeremy speak in Liverpool, 2015, I just that was my hubby there. We just both went, we have to have him as our Prime Minister, and very sadly we won't. And Claire, don't cry. All right.
Try my best.
So so I'm one of the oldest Labour legends. I'll be 70 in February. I wasn't the oldest campaigner by a long shot, but I thought I'll just stay in the calling team because then I won't have to walk around. And of course I gave that up and just went out every day to the marginals and got lost in the Welsh hills in the dark and trying to find people because I didn't walk as fast as them, Anyway, but I want to say big shout out to the calling team. I've worked personally in international volunteering all my life, and I know a good volunteer culture when I sit in one, and they were so motivating and caring. But the most amazing thing for me every day was to log into Slack, where we had our communication platform, and see people from all around the world. The internationalism of our movement is so strong, and we must build it. People from the USA, from Korea, Japan, China, Singapore, Austria, everywhere, Germany, Canada, New York, Boston, people every day saying we want to help, because they knew a Corbyn-led Labour government would be a real pushback on Trump and his destructive politics and bring about peace in this world. And this is what we're about. We're about the hope, we're about the peace, we're about caring for each other, and we must be really inclusive and go into communities. Please keep the Labour community organising unit. It is vital, vital, vital. And please have it everywhere. And we must go in our communities and be as inclusive and kind and caring and live those Labour values, because that's what I saw. I was so excited to be part of this campaign, and you know, I am actually heartbroken, but you know, we have each other wherever we are, and that bond and those bonds we've formed will go on. They will persist. They are forever. So thank you so much for everything you've done, John and Jeremy. Please tell him how much we love him and love you, and everybody. You know, thank you so much.
Thank you, Lisa. Really, really appreciate that. Also, thank you to John, Kulsum, and Ash for sharing their stories. It's really heartwarming and inspiring to kind of see and hear what this campaign has meant to people across the UK, not just those who have been campaigning for 30 years, but for those who've been campaigning for the first time. And it also, I think, just shows like the clear, strong determination across our movement for people to want to get stuck in and to fight back and to keep going, which I think is really amazing. I also want to give a shout out to Putney, who were the ones who were microwaving the water sheets on polling day when they were really wet. Amazing. So now we need to talk about what happens next and what we're going to be doing right now. So people across our movement are going to respond in different ways to this defeat in the immediate term. Some of us are going to want to take some time out completely to rest and recuperate. Some of us are going to want to get stuck into organizing straight away. What's really important, however, is that after a loss like this, there's a period of reflection, and it's essential that we're open and honest about what went right and what went wrong. And that we come together and go through this process collectively so we can come together on the other side stronger and ready for action in the new year. At first, this means we need you to do what some of you are already doing, which is to hold meetings across the country. Living rooms, pubs, cafe, you name it. We need you to get together with those you've campaigned with and reflect on why we lost and where next for our movement. This is really important for working out as a movement what went wrong and what we can do next. It's also really important because we need your feedback. Many of you have been organizing these meetups already, which is fantastic. If you haven't yet and want some support in doing so, we've worked with the World Transformed to write a script on how to run your own meetings. You can go to the link is bit.ly/election meetup to find the script in the guide. I think someone behind the computer is about to post that into the chat. Perfect, you just done that. Once you set a date and time for your meeting, what we need you to do is then submit your events to mycampaignmap.com so other people in your area can find out about them and join you. You don't have to have a public meeting if you don't want to. If you want to have a small scale thing with your friends, that's absolutely fine. But please hold these meetings. You can do this. You can upload your meetings onto the events as you did during the general election campaign. Just go to mycampaignmap.com, click add events, and then follow through the steps in there. If you're interested in doing it but not sure or want some more support, you can also follow the separate link, which is bit.ly/PECM19, and we'll contact you about how you can host an event, even if it's a public one or a private event. Again, I think that's all been posted in chat. Secondly, another really key thing is that what we want to do immediately is to kind of keep our movement going, keep the momentum. Apologies. One of the best things about this election campaign is how we transformed our movement. The huge upsurge of volunteer activity, be it with thousands of you who went canvassing or the thousands of you who joined one of our amazing volunteer teams, was incredible and powerful. If we're going to reach out to the millions of people who didn't vote for us, and if we're going to build the power in communities, we have to keep our movement going and build it so it's even bigger. At first, this means keeping going and repurposing some of our brilliant infrastructure that we've built during this campaign up and down the country. This means we're going to maintain or repurpose our volunteer teams, from the amazing research team that's been digging into the policies and what lots of the Tory MPs have been up to, our calling and texting team, which will continue to mobilize our members and to help them build tenants unions, help out in migrant support centers, and turn out protests. What's key to emphasize here is that during the election, many of you were leading those teams yourselves. We don't want to go back to a movement where volunteers are shut out. We want to continue building a movement that is run by volunteers and where volunteers are empowered and play a central role. This coming week, we're going to be running calls of all our different teams in order to chat about how we're going to be repurposing each team. And so keep an eye out for those emails in your inbox. I'm now going to hand over to Claire, who is going to be talking about what comes next.
Thanks, Santi. So just to stress, that it's just a few days since the election ended, and it's really important that we don't rush this period of reflection. We really need like a movement-wide conversation to happen to work out, what happened in this election and where we go next. And we also all definitely need a well-deserved rest over Christmas. I know that, we all in the office are exhausted. I'm sure that the thousands of you are as well, because we put so much into this campaign. But there are a few key priorities that have come up time and again in conversations that we've been having in canvassing WhatsApp threads, on social media, and in Momentum's volunteer Slack as well. And so we thought it would be really good to highlight these to inform the conversation as to where we go next. So the first is that we need to reach out and we need to listen. So Labour's coalition of urban and small towns didn't hold together in this election. We lost voters across the country, such as in Redcar, in Bolsover and Wrexham. because the Labour vote either, stayed at home or voted Tory for the first time. We lost those in Scotland who voted for the SNP. We lost Remainers who still backed the Tories in suburban constituencies. And we lost, some progressives who backed the Greens, the Lib Dems in Tory Labour marginals too. And we lost pensioners who voted Conservative in their drove, despite the fact that the Tories' woeful record on the NHS is appalling, as is their policy on pensions and social care. Now, it's no good blaming these voters for the outcome of the election. It's our job to win them back, and we can't wait until the next election to do that. The second thing that really needs to inform what we do next is that we need to build power for the long term. So the Tories in government means attacks on the working class and minorities. And whatever Johnson says, we know that he will govern for the rich, and grotesque inequality caused by austerity and decades of neglect is only going to get worse. Our movement needs to be there. And this means that we need to work in our communities to build power and build trust. We need to work with communities to make real change now, not just promise it when we get into government in 5 years' time. This means two things. First, we need to work with communities to shield them from the worst effects of a Tory government. This means that we need to be volunteering in food banks, we need to be organising against deportations and supporting those on universal credit. We need to be showing solidarity outside of election time. Number two, we need to build power in communities so that we can fight back, be it joining tenants' unions or supporting striking workers or organising in our workplaces. We need to build power outside of Parliament as well as within it. It's clear that there's no shortcut to socialism, as we've seen in this election, and we need to build these foundations first. And if we can get just a fraction of the volunteer power that we saw during this election to building power in communities, then that will be a really, really good start. The third thing that we need to be bearing in mind now is keeping Labour socialist. So one thing is really crystal clear from this election, that our movement must defend the radical transformational policy platform that we've built over these last few years. We know that these policies are popular and we know that they are our greatest asset. We also know that they're right and that they're sorely needed. So some in our party are going to come back and say that we need to shift to the right and that we need to go back to the centrism of Blair. But this election has put the final nail in that coffin. Change UK got just 0% of the vote in this election, and the Liberal Democrats only got 12%. This means that we can't budge an inch when it comes to our anti-racist principles, on our commitment to ambitious climate targets, and to a just foreign policy, and to so much more. The Labour Party is nothing if it doesn't stand up for the most vulnerable in society and across the world, and seek to fundamentally shift power away from the few and towards the many. So in the new year, there's going to be a leadership and deputy leadership election, as well as 2 NEC elections. And a big priority for our movement will be to win these elections and make sure that we keep Labour socialist. So we need to get ready for that. So that's almost it for tonight's call. Before we go, just really, really quickly, want to hear from Laura Parker, who's our national coordinator, who's just got a few words before we finish.
Hi, everybody. This is going to be brief because otherwise I'll cry. The only real thing we want to say is an enormous thank you. It has been the most extraordinary campaign. It has been truly humbling to be part of it. I think we've demonstrated not just to the Labour Party, but also to the country how a good campaign should be run. It's been inclusive, energetic, open. We've really tried to share skills and knowledge. We've listened to what people have said to us along the way. People across the country have made videos. We've helped them amplify them, but it's been their story that we've helped tell. We've really tried to make this as out there and bottom up as possible. Obviously, there are things that we can learn, but the thing that we've really understood from this campaign is what solidarity looks like. And the fact that we have got 3,000 people, some of us at the lowest point that we've probably had for quite a long time, coming together this evening, unembarrassed about what we want to do in the world, and proud still of the politics that we believe in, despite the fact that we've just had this devastating loss. That for me is solidarity. The fact that I can sit here, probably going to blub, and Claire already did, and John Mac definitely did, in front of people that we've never met and probably will never see in real life. That to me is solidarity. And in coming days and weeks, when things get nasty as they will, we have to hang on to the hope that was embedded in our brilliant manifesto. And most of all, we have to stand firm and side by side with the people who are now really going to get it in the neck. Because unfortunately, you know, we've just seen our country elect a racist, xenophobic, homophobe. And he's anti-poor, anti-migrant, anti-black, anti-gay. There is nothing good to be said about this man, and there is everything good and completely the opposite about our politics. But in these coming days and weeks, we've got to really stand firm with those who are most on the front line and are going to feel the brunt of this bastard Johnson's government. And that's what solidarity will be. So we are genuinely really humbled. It's extraordinary that so many people have joined us this evening. Get some sleep, eat properly, or organise, depending on what's going to make you feel better tomorrow. I'm going to go for sleep. And stay with us. Please stay in touch with all the teams. There's going to be phone calls across the week. We want to hear what you think. We genuinely want to hear what you think. We want to learn from this because we want to win and we need to win and the country needs us to win. So send us your thoughts, join our phone calls, send us emails, come to meetings. Keep strong, stay together, and let's be nice to each other and kind to one another over coming days. And thank you from everyone in Team Momentum for this extraordinary effort and solidarity. And to those we won't see in coming days, we'll see you in the new year. Yeah. Thanks a lot, and thanks to Claire and to Santi and to Ash and the two chaps sitting behind the computer keeping all the techie stuff going.
Thanks, Laura.
Okay, thanks everybody.
So yes, that's pretty much it. Just want to reiterate Laura's thanks. Like, we can't thank each of you enough for everything you've done and everything you're doing for the movement that we're building together. Here's a quick reminder of what's going to happen in the coming days and what you need to do after the call. So firstly, please organise meetings across the country with your friends and your comrades who worked in this campaign to solidify those communities beyond the election, to come together, to share your experience of the campaign and start thinking about where we go from here. I really recommend that you take some time in those meetings to start mapping out the local struggles and radical community organisations that already exist in your community, and what organisations we're going to need to be building over the next year, the next 2 years, the next 5 years. Please put those events on mycampaignmap.com, so maybe people who are feeling lonely, particularly as it's Christmas time, can join those and then really get something out of them. Secondly, we'll be in touch next week to talk about how we're going to be repurposing our campaign infrastructure into movement building infrastructure for the long haul. Particularly if you've not been involved in one of our volunteer teams, keep an eye on your emails over the next week for details of further calls that we're going to be holding. Number 3, we're going to be in touch this week to get your view of Momentum's campaign and what you did in the election, so we can analyse what was successful, where our gaps were, and so on. So please keep an eye out for that and fill that in when you see it, because it's going to be really, really important moving forward. And finally, we need you to keep in touch. So the best way to find out about how to be involved in our growing movement in the coming years is to join our mailing list. So if you haven't already, please sign up at peoplesmomentum.com and we'll be in touch again soon. So that's a wrap. So thank you so much to all of you for joining the call. And just to say once again that I've been so moved to see how many people have come together for this call tonight. The fact that this call is bigger than the first call that we had at the start of the campaign just shows that, we're not going to let this defeat end our struggle for a better world. And we're so determined to build a deeper, stronger, more powerful movement over the coming months and weeks and years. I'm genuinely really, really excited to be working with all of you to move forward in that struggle for a better world. And that struggle is ultimately what gives us the things that make life worth living. So hope, comradeship and fulfillment. And so as Jeremy said at the launch of Labour's manifesto, quoting Pablo Neruda, you can cut all the flowers, but you cannot keep the springs from coming. So thanks everyone. I'm going to have a cry now.
La lucha continua, comrades.
Bye everyone. Love you guys.